Welcome back to Raiders in Focus, the Randolph School podcast. I'm Elizabeth Crampsey, Director of Marketing and Communications.
And I'm Glynn, Director of Admission. Thank you so much for tuning in today.
On this podcast, we take listeners inside of Randolph. We share the stories, programs, and values that shape our community and the decisions that we make as a school.
And today we're talking about STEM education. It's something that touches every division and really shapes how students experience learning at Randolph.
STEM isn't just a set of classes, it's a way of thinking. It starts in pre K and continues all the way through 12th grade, showing up in classrooms, projects, and experiences across campus.
And we are thrilled to welcome our guest today, Dr. Philip Taylor, our STEM coordinator.
Dr. Taylor brings experience in teaching, program development, and building makerspaces that gives students the opportunity to explore, design, and create.
Philip, we're so glad you're here. You've been on our list all year from the very beginning back in August when Elizabeth and I were having our dream team assembled. So we're excited you're here. Welcome to Raiders in Focus.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
All right, Philip, let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you into education?
So I grew up in Tennessee, not too far from here. And my mom was a teacher, and so I swore I would never be a teacher. And then that's the story for most of us, I guess, right?
That's great.
Went to college and studied math and computer science, and had a lot of fun with that. And then I really just was kind of drawn to teaching students math, and had a lot of fun with that, and taught high school level and community college level for a while. And just always been interested in how students learn and what works best, especially with math, like what makes those skills stick and what makes it something that students are really going to want to get into. And I've also always been drawn to, hands-on environment where students are building things and using the math skills or the science skills and using those to make something that they're going to remember and make those skills that they learn really sticky.
Awesome. You were at Trinity Valley School before you came to us in Fort Worth, Texas. And you shared a little bit with us that you had this growing makerspace in the corner of your classroom. But what did your role look like there, I guess, compared to here?
Yeah, so when I started, I was teaching math and physics, and over the years, I picked up a programming class and found myself teaching computer science. And then, kind of much like Randolph, we had a super supportive parent community who were, donating 3D printers and laser cutters. And somehow those just always ended up in my room. I was the person who would say, "Yeah, that sounds fun. Let's see what we can do with it." Started really thinking about how to incorporate those into classes so that students were using the 3D printers to support what they were learning in physics instead of making fidgets or whatever, right? And so over time, those spaces kind of grew, and I had a lot of fun expanding what was capable for the students and what they could make as part of their coursework there.
I just love that story. I imagine a corner of your math class.
It just kept growing. Yeah.
Slowly growing.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So, what made Randolph and Huntsville the right move for you and your family?
So my grandfather was actually born in Madison County. Growing up, when we came to family reunions, they were at Montesano, right?
Okay, that's a fun fact.
Yeah. So this has always been, always enjoyed Huntsville, and of course it's beautiful. But we really wanted to be closer to family and just love the outdoors opportunities here, being in the hills where there's trails and we can do those sorts of things. And then when opportunity came up at Randolph, and knew the school by reputation through some friends, and we came and toured, and it was obvious I could see my kids there. And it was the sort of place that you really supported learning and growing. And I love the core values of curiosity and growth mindset. And that just feels like what I'm all about. So it felt like home from the first time I saw campus.
So, all three kids are here now, right?
Yes. So we're in first grade and fourth grade and seventh grade now. So
Okay, you get a little taste of lower and middle school. Then
absolutely.
I remember when you were interviewing and touring and considering this community, and Adam Dubay, our head of school, was over the moon. He was convinced that you would make a big difference here, be an impact maker. I think you have in your 2 years here so far. Amazing what you've accomplished.
Well, thank you. I've had a whole lot of fun along the way.
And your role covers a lot of ground. When we were preparing for this session, you were explaining your responsibilities to us, and I was actually blown away. Can you talk a little bit about what your responsibilities are?
Yeah, so the title is STEM coordinator. And one of the biggest things that I've tried to do since I came was get a handle on all of the making equipment we have. We have a whole lot of capability, and then really expanding that and making it accessible to students. We've always had 3D printers. But now we've got a couple of makerspaces where those 3D printers can live. We've been able to expand and, get some more tools like CNC machines and laser cutters and really make those accessible.
What's a
Yeah.
CNC machine?
The CNC machine is a computer numerically controlled device. The CNC machine that we have has a router on it and it moves around in 3 dimensions like a 3D printer would, and it can remove material from wood or from metal.
That's amazing.
So that's kind of like the flashiest part of what I do. But the other big parts is making sure we have a really cohesive STEM program, starting with the littles and going all the way up into the high school. And so working on making sure we have a really clear sense of what students are doing in STEM along the way. So we've done an engineering club with the middle school. We started an amateur radio club this year. So that was a lot of fun to get to use things that look like small walkie-talkies up to big radios with huge antennas where we were making contacts across the world just using radio waves. And
I
so
think
all of that's been a lot of fun.
there've been some parents that are engaging in this as well.
Yeah, so thankfully, some parents of some of the kids in the club just had expertise. They run companies in Huntsville that do radio sort of technology things, and so they've been able to come in. And so it's always fun when we get parents who are sharing in those club environments too.
I think it just speaks to the community that we have that is for parents as well as
Mm.
students. And so I love that you're connecting with those parents. That's amazing. I was sharing with Philip a few weeks ago this story of an alum who visited campus. He graduated in '84, and he came back several years ago to tour, and he was reminiscing about his time on campus when there were maker spaces. That's not what we called them in 1980, but there were places where he was comfortable to go in and learn this new thing called computer science and programming and coding. And he described this lab experience. And he was talking to our head of school about that. And it really impacted our head of school to think this is something that we are doing, but we need to be more intentional and build a robust program. And I think that little nugget preceded your hiring, and then the dream is just coming true, it sounds like. Would talk a little bit about what STEM looks like. How does it come to life? How is it different than maybe a STEM education program that our listeners might be familiar with?
Yeah. So STEM, I mean, the acronym is science and technology and engineering and math. And I almost hate that we use that acronym so much because it feels like we've got four different things. And STEM is really when any one of those four comes together with another one of the four. So when we're using science and technology together, or when we're using math and science in an engineering project, we're solving some problems. And that's kind of what engineering is as well, right? It's applied knowledge. We're going to use the knowledge that we have from different areas and put that together to solve problems. And so that's really what when we say STEM, that's what we mean, right? We're taking multiple of those things and maybe also some history or maybe some art. And maybe that's the second thing that we're pairing with technology to solve a problem. When we talk about STEM, that's really what we mean. And it's really the mindset that we want all of our students to be in. It's curious, it's creative, we're solving problems as we go. And so that's more important than the individual subjects, being curious and growing in what we're doing, solving problems, being ingenuitive. And so when we do STEM, it's all about the students. They're actually building things, they're actually exploring, they're testing ideas, and then they're iterating on it. They're making what they do better and better as they go. The big idea is that it's going to be active. They're building something instead of just listening, or they've got a problem that they really care about and they're searching for a solution. And that's something that's going to be integrated across disciplines, and where students are going to be building connections that carry across all of the subjects and into these real world situations.
You mentioned earlier that two of our core values resonated with you, which are curiosity and a growth mindset, both of which connect so naturally to STEM and your whole world. How do you see these values play out in the classroom?
Yeah, so when I think about growth mindset, that's probably my favorite because one of the engineering design steps is iteration. We're always doing something and testing it and evaluating was that good or not, and then coming full circle. And so to me, growth mindset is just part of what engineering is. I really want our kids to be curious above all. It's awesome when they can take a test and make 100, but the real value is the student cares about something that they see in the world and they ask questions about it and they come back to it. That curiosity is way more important than a grade ever can be. Between those two things, we're going to make people who are really changing the world that they're living in because they see problems, they're curious about it, they want to investigate, and then they keep iterating through their solutions until they do something that really makes an impact.
I can see those values woven into, every grade level, every division, so this is really a school-wide effort. I love that you are looking at it so globally. Can you talk a little bit about how this program is structured across divisions?
Yeah, so even our youngest students are doing STEM and science. They're already super curious, and we just want to give them an environment where they can play and explore and learn about the world around them. All of our students have dedicated technology time every week. Often our technology teacher and our science teacher, they're working together. So we're taking these science skills we're learning about and the technology skills that we're learning about and putting them together to make something. In the middle school, we have a whole lot of club opportunities and elective opportunities that students can take. And then in the upper school, we have an engineering class, but we've also got lots of opportunities for students to use the makerspaces to support what they're building and learning in their other classes. But across the board, right, the focus is making sort of a cohesive STEM journey for the kids. So it starts with that curiosity in pre-K, and then as they grow and get older, they're able to do more. They're able to make more connections, and so that's our goal is that cohesive experience.
You mentioned that natural curiosity and the strong desire to explore with our youngest students in lower school, starting with pre K. Can you talk about what STEM looks like in lower school going through fourth grade?
Yeah, so even starting in pre-K, the goal is always to have daily exposure to these science and math ideas, even the sensory centers, right? They're geared around giving room for the students to be curious and explore. Regular time with the science and the technology specialists so that they can develop those skills. And then in kindergarten through fourth, there's weekly instruction time in science and technology. And a lot of those units are really hands-on too. So it's not just learning facts about science, but it's building things that support that and really kind of cement the knowledge and build the science skills.
I'm always impressed when I go into Mrs. Tucker's room and see first grade students coding robots.
Yeah, and I mean, the world we live in is lots of robotics, right? It's fun for them to think about, what does this robot do? Well, it senses its environment and it makes computations and then it has output. That's the basics of robotics is input and computation and output. So it's neat that they can get that model even from first grade.
I
Yes.
loved your, comment about failure and having that curiosity to grow when you're testing and trying because, Melissa Tucker, our tech specialist, will say that, part of her job is to really help with meltdowns.
Mm,
Because when our kids are wrong, and this is not just Randolph kids, it really is a meltdown. So managing that and understanding that feeling of failure is everything
mhm,
in a growth mindset environment, and I think that takes a long time.
yeah.
It doesn't just happen.
She says, "Fail forward" all the time to
Fail
students and
forward.
to teachers and anybody else who will listen. Fail
That's it,
forward.
that's
Yeah.
it. Well, what stands out to you about how students engage with STEM at this young age?
Our kids come to us so curious and they just want to explore. Our goal is really to just foster that and let that grow and see that blossom up through middle school and upper school.
You remember textbooks of old that would have the
Mhm.
chapter, and then there were questions at the end of the
Yeah.
chapter that you had to
we try
answer?
we try and avoid that.
Let's come up
Yeah.
with our own questions, shall
Yeah.
we?
Yeah. And they really do. They have so many great questions and they're just open to trying new things. Most of our students they're really unafraid to try something new and see what happens. And that's what we want to really foster. And then building those problem solving skills too, making a really strong foundation for all of their future learning.
And with that strong foundation, they move forward to middle school. We have our fourth grade moving up ceremony coming up for those that are moving into middle school. How does the STEM experience shift?
Yeah, so we just keep growing on those skills and the knowledge and, I absolutely love what middle school teachers are doing, especially in science classes. And when I think of middle school science that I had, there was a lot of sitting, a lot of listening, maybe labeling diagrams and that sort of thing. And there's still a lot of knowledge that our students get, but there's also a whole lot of building. If you're learning about gravity, well, let's drop something and see what happens, or let's build something that falls and see how that works. And so there's a problem based and project based science that our middle school students are doing. And then we have a ton of elective opportunities. So I'm thinking about things like, robotics or a radio club. We have some programming classes where students can be super creative in the way that they're using code to make games and animations and those sorts of things. And just a lot of integration of design thinking across subjects. Even in our English classes, they have some engineering writing that they do. Or in a design engineering class that Miss Van Weber does in the middle school. It's all about finding a problem and trying to empathize with the people who have those problems and then making something to solve them.
How do you see students growing throughout the middle school program?
Yeah, I think ideally we just really grow in our confidence, right? It's one thing as a fifth grader to start using some tools, but then by the time we're in eighth grade, we want them to be super confident. They know the tools that they're using, they have the skills, and that they can make the things that they want to make. Collaboration, communication, that's also a huge focus. If you go into one of our fifth grade science classes, they're going to be presenting a whole lot. They've done something and they're going to present to their peers about it. And they're confident communicators about what they've done. They can tell other people and be really proud of their work. As our students are getting older, they're willing to take on even bigger challenges, and they're going to become a whole lot better at just really connecting the skills from one domain to another.
And then in upper school, students have the opportunity to go even deeper. What does that look like?
So in our science classes, of course, we've got all of the honors classes and the AP, the lab-based courses that they can take. There's also a lot more opportunities for electives. So students who are interested in coding might take a computer science class. We have engineering classes so that students can really build the skills that they'll be using in college and actually in their careers. I know we don't normally think about art as being STEM, but it really is at Randolph because our students are learning the technology skills to make art in new modern ways. So they're going to be learning the software that they would be using if they were building a video game or using the software that they would be using if they were working for a graphics design company.
I think it works both ways too, because our lower school art program is kind of famous for David House will ask students always, have I done my best and how can I improve my work?
Mm,
Which I can't imagine
yeah,
a better engineering
right.
tenant, right? Like, how do we make this work? And then lab based science courses, we're writing labs. It is observation, it is hypothesis, which is a part of your
Mhm.
program, I would think, is still very important.
Yeah, and so I think there's a whole lot of interplay with the scientific process and the engineering process, and I think the biggest difference in the upper school, though, is just that our students have opportunity to really decide what they're interested in and then go for it, and so we have a lot of students that are interested in things that they're not gonna find a course on, but they can build a club around.
Let's talk about the summer internship program. There's a big buzz around that.
Yeah, so Andrea Logan runs that program in the upper school, and we have a lot of awesome companies in Huntsville that are doing really cool STEM things, and I'm so thankful that they're willing to take some of our students in and grow them and mentor them, and it always amazes me when I meet someone from one of those companies who will tell me about our students at Randolph. This has happened at a baseball game. I met somebody who had worked really closely with one of our interns, and they said they were most surprised by is how ready for real work that student was. Like, they were giving them real tasks. There wasn't going and getting coffee because that student was more valuable doing CAD work on a computer or troubleshooting some system. They were more useful doing that than they were making copies or getting coffee. And so that made me really proud
They
of
were
what we're doing
prepared.
here.
Yeah,
Yeah, they were ready.
that's a huge accomplishment.
We have students that are actually getting paid for those experiences. I had a student mention that they needed to go to work after school. And so when they said that, I was thinking, well, what kind of job does a high schooler do? Are they flipping burgers or what are they doing? Like, oh no, they actually work for one of the companies that's on the arsenal and they're getting to do
That's
to do real
awesome.
things.
Remarkable. But we have to talk about the makerspace. For someone who hasn't seen it, how would you describe it?
So when you first walk in, most of the time it's a little bit messy, and I try and manage the chaos a little bit. But as far as making tools have, like we've got 3D printers that we would expect, but we also have a really nice laser cutter that can cut thick wood and do engraving sorts of things. We've got a CNC machine where we can mill metal. We've got some of the traditional things that we would think of from a shop. We've got drill presses and saws. We've got all that equipment, but the goal that's behind everything is how do we empower students to use this to solve a problem that they have or to make something that supports one of their interests, right? A lot of times we'll have students that are working on things that are related to class. I say a lot of times, sometimes. More often though, it's just I had an idea of something I want to make and they'll come in and make things. I love it. I feel like we're doing a good job when there's students working on lots of different things and they're helping each other out. There becomes a buzz around what one student is doing. And so everyone will kind of gather around them and they'll have ideas and going back and forth.
And this makerspace, you mentioned that it transcends coursework, right? Can you talk about how students find time to come in and be curious?
Yeah. So one of the things that you've talked about with other guests on the podcast is the schedule in the upper school. There's a substantial amount of time where students aren't responsible for being in one particular seat. That's great for the students who need extra support in a class. They can go get that, but the makerspace is open most of the time too. And so students can come in with just any idea that they want and work on that in the off time. And I love that our schedule supports that work.
I think we gotta talk about the 12th grade project you're working on because 'cause I'm just sitting on it over here, and it's so fun
Yeah,
about the
this is one of my favorite projects that's come up. We had a group of seniors who, in a world where it's easy to claim senioritis and I just don't want to do anything else and I want to go home, these seniors came and asked if they could build an electric go kart. And I always try and say yes to what students want to do, right? I want to support that, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking this is more than we can do in a spring semester. There's no way it's going to finish. And so we tried to think about all of the potential things that could go wrong with that. And I kept asking the students to write the proposal, hone in on their ideas. How are we going to take care of managing materials and all of those sorts of things? And they were just so invested that they kept doing all the things that I asked them to do. It got to the point where they actually had a a model on their computer of the frame and the batteries and the motors and how it was all going to work. After they'd done all that, it was impossible not to say, all right, we're going to have to give this a go. And so over the past month or so, we've been cutting steel. They designed their battery. They needed a 72-volt battery. And so they started with buying cells, like the individual cells, and spot welding those together and getting a BMS that would work with that. And it was a ton of research and a ton of actual time. To be honest, it was a lot of research for me. I felt like I was staying a couple of steps ahead. They pushed me to learn something new. I absolutely love
So it's
that.
easy, I think. I'm sitting over here going, "Well, that's so cool," and, it's rare that I'm in the makerspace when there's not a student that pops in, and that's so cool. Philip, why is that so important for a student to be able to just breeze in and get to work?
Yeah. Well, living in 2026, things are easy, right? If I want to solve a problem, there's very few things that I can't open my phone and push a couple of buttons and then, 24, 48 hours later have a
Yep,
box on my front desk, right?
yep.
And so what I really want for our students is for them to work through that. Sure, it's easy to push a button, but so much of the time with a little bit of work, we can actually make something that hasn't existed before. We can make a product that solves our problem better than anything that we could buy. That's why I love having a makerspace that's open that students can come in and sometimes they have an idea for something they want to make. A lot of times they just have a problem though, right? And they just need an idea to bounce that problem off of. And we can think, well, what could we do? What are our options? And then having those tools ready so that once they have a direction they want to go, it's easy and low friction to get going. That's super important to me.
It's really a shift in mindset too, because, traditional schools have this 50-minute, 60-minute parameters around a
Mm,
class. And that's the only time that you can be creative. And that's
Yeah.
simply not the human way or the
Yeah.
human spirit. And so it's really clearly a vibe in your space.
Well, that's the goal. And we always want to keep things really agile too. Sometimes we're going to have problems that we can't solve with the tools that we have. And we're always willing to do research and help those students out. The students who wanted to make the go kart, we could do almost everything in the makerspace other than actually weld the frame together. We don't have capacity to weld yet in the upper school. That's not been a thing we do. But it turns out the Randolph community is just awesome. It took about 2 phone calls before I had someone who was willing to open their shop up and bring the students in and teach them, and so I think that's part of it too, right? We have cool tools, that's awesome when they solve the problem we have, let's go for it, but let's be creative when they don't.
Such a good example. Upper School Theater put on the show Matilda this year, and it was one of the highlights of the year for most of us. It was such a great show. Kudos to the art department for that, and also kudos to the STEM department and the students that had the opportunity to use your makerspace to contribute to that. Can you talk about what surprised us all on stage in Matilda?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. So early on when they were working on the show, Mr. Pavlik said, "I've got this harebrained idea. Something needs to move with Matilda." He had some ideas for maybe using like a CO2 canister, like a puff of
It needed
air
to move
needed to move
magically.
magically without any interaction, right? And so other schools that have done this show, you can get pretty fancy tying fishing line to a cup or whatever. But he really thought it would be neat if we did something had a little more oomph to it. So a few students in the engineering class started brainstorming how this could work, and they found we could use a microcontroller. So that's just a really small computer that's like the size of a credit card, right? Maybe we could mount that in one of the boxes that they're using for staging and use a piston to actually, punch the cup off of the table and be a big effect. And that was a ton of fun. And I loved it because there were so many different things. We've got the microcontroller, we have a computer, we've got these physical electrical devices. Turns out those devices required higher voltage than the computer did. And so we kept running into little problems that we think we had it, and then there's a new little problem that propped up. And we would solve that problem and kept going back and forth. It was a ton of fun to get to see that on stage, and the kids were proud of the work that they'd done on it for sure.
It's amazing. It's good fun, and I think you were in the audience and
Yes,
enjoyed that moment,
they created magic
especially.
for sure. I was wondering how it happened and was happy to learn.
Magic. Are there any other projects that highlight the STEM mindset that you wanna share?
Yeah. So in the upper school, there's always students coming up with ideas. And I absolutely love that. One of the ideas, a 10th grader came in and said, I've seen this robotics competition. Like we do robotics where things drive around in a gym, but I've seen this competition where people build submersibles, like remote operated submersible vehicles. So it's kind of the size of an Amazon shipping box or something, and it can swim and it's got motors on it, it's controlled, and it's going and picking objects up. And so I thought that idea was awesome, and so we put together a team. They've started working on that project.
Oregon Trail. I think they've got something that's, got a little more oomph to it this year.
Yeah, so the 4th grade Oregon Trail project has been a big one for a long time, right? It all leads up to a simulation near the end of school where students, get in their wagons and just kinda like the old game we remember, the Oregon Trail. This year, I was talking to the 4th grade teachers about how we might pull some STEM into that, and so one of the big ideas that transcends from the early up until the upper school is building digital models of things, and then maybe that looks like a 3D print, or maybe that looks like being able to use a laser, but how do we go from an idea that's in our head to something that's in the computer that we can use? And so 4th grade was a great way to introduce some CAD, some computer design. They got to pick one object that they might want to take with them on the Oregon Trail. So maybe it was a harmonica or a family Bible or, whatever they wanted to take. And so on their computers, I've taught them how to build those digital models, and then we're going to 3D print them, and they're going to actually carry them along in the
That's
simulation.
awesome.
And and don't tell them, but I think at some point they're gonna have to decide, "Is this too much? Is this too heavy? Can I keep it with me? Or is this something that I love and I'm gonna have to leave behind?" And so hopefully that'll be a meaningful moment for them.
They'll fail forward.
Fail forward, that's right.
What about middle school? Can you think of a few examples there?
Yeah, so those skills really grow from 4th grade into 5th grade. Students are learning all about ancient civilizations and history. And one of the things they get to do is build a model, but it's a lot more precise. So instead of something that they want to build, they find an artifact. So something from maybe the ancient Babylonians or from ancient Egypt, right? They find pictures of that from museums, and our librarian works with them on doing the research. And then I work with them on building the model of that. And so then they can 3D print them. They're 5th grade history teacher works on writing, like, how do I write about all of this research?
Mhm.
And then we put it together in a museum. And so they've got their writing showing the research they've done. They've got a model that they made of these objects, and it's really pretty awesome. We set it up in the library this year, and so students from across the middle school got to come in and see what they had done, and so it was a really fun project in
Yeah,
5th grade.
it's amazing.
And it touches on research, writing, computer design, modeling. It's
Yeah, it's cross-curricular, interdisciplinary. It's what we wanna be about with STEM.
so much is happening in the current makerspace, but we're so excited to get a new makerspace here soon. What can you share with us about that?
Yes, as part of the Leo Center having awesome new athletic facilities, they've got a great new weight room, but that meant that we had the old weight room in the Schultz Jones gym that was going to be empty, and so we're going to be setting that up as a maker space right there above the gym, and I can't wait because it's glass from floor to ceiling, and it's going to be a giant big fishbowl where you can go to a basketball game and hopefully see students working on the second floor doing awesome projects. So.
How will that space expand what students are able to do?
Right now, we're using a classroom for the makerspace, and it's awesome. It's been a great space. It's, with the art department, and so there's so much I love about that, but it's small, right? And the new space is going to be over 2,000 square feet that we're gonna have to dedicate to making things. We're gonna have room for some of the dustier things that are kinda hard to use now with saws and hopefully some bigger CNC machines, that sort of thing. But then we're also gonna have a clean area for the 3D printing. It's gonna have some classroom space. I love that we're gonna have students that are gonna be working on just wide, diverse, different projects in different parts of that room, but it's all gonna be visible to everybody else who's in the room. And so I really hope that's gonna just increase our capability for collaboration when we got students working on neat things together.
Speak a little bit about how faculty are engaged with your program.
Yeah. So it's awesome when a student comes up with an idea, but I really try and push our teachers to think how they might use some of this stuff too. I'm thinking of a couple of teachers who have a pencil that they really, really like. And they've started coming in 3D printing pencil
Okay.
holders that they can keep. One of them's from Lord of the Rings. And so he's got pencils that look like arrows sticking out of his back. And there's just so many good projects like that. Our dance coach decided it would be a lot of fun to give Christmas gifts to the girls on the dance team, a nice like water Stanley cup that had their names engraved on it. So she was able to come down and use a laser and engrave the names on those cups. And I thought that was really special because she got new skills, but she also poured her heart into these Christmas gifts.
I think you did a faculty master class where you had parents who were coming in and
So that was one of the most fun things because we had kindergarten parents on up to upper school parents, and they were working beside some of our teachers that were doing that class too. They got an introduction to all the different machines, and then the last couple of weeks were really just for them to come up with an idea and make something neat. And it was so much fun to watch them be collaborative, embrace that growth mindset. It just reminded me that that's one of the things I love about our Randolph community. We talk about failing forward and growing and trying new things for our students, but our parents really buy into that too, and I think that's what makes it so special that we all get to work and learn together.
I just had a little spark. We need to do a lunch and learn in the STEM
Yeah,
makerspace
that would be
this
a ton of
fall. Wouldn't
fun.
that be awesome? Just so
Mhm.
parents, it doesn't have to be a class, but parents can pop in.
Perhaps faculty too. Sign me up.
There
To
we
get
go.
in on
There
that.
we go.
So, Philip, you've done so much in 2 short years. Looking back, what are you most proud of so far during your time at Randolph?
Well, I appreciate that. I really love that we've got spaces where students feel empowered to use the things that they're learning from different classes, put it together to make new things. Anytime I see a student who takes ownership for what they're doing, instead of waiting for an assignment, they say, "Ooh, I want to explore this. I want to make this." And just building that sense of exploration. That's what I'm all about. And I can't wait to see that grow more and more.
And looking ahead, what are you most excited to build at Randolph in the coming years?
Yeah, we talked about the new makerspace area in the upper school. That's awesome. I'm really excited that we were able to hire a new middle school STEM person for next year. And so that's going to mean our makerspace on the Drake campus has someone in it a lot more often than it does now. So students in study halls will be able to make things there, to think about how they might use 3D printing or use a laser to support something that they're doing in another class. That's super, super powerful. And I'm really excited to explore this idea of what does a STEM education at Randolph look like, right? What does it look like in kindergarten as we progress up? How do our students grow?
For families who may be hearing about Randolph for the first time, what would you want them to understand about STEM here? If there was one message you could just drive home.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that STEM's really about developing thinking capability, problem solving capability in our students. It's really about learning how to think on our own, how to take ownership for what we do, to be responsible, and that's just so powerful for our students, right? When they have ownership of what they're doing, that's probably the most important thing is developing those problem solving skills and being able to integrate things across disciplines.
Yes, it prepares students for whatever path they choose and allows them to explore a range of interests without feeling limited to a single path.
Yeah, that's so true. We talk a lot about failing forward and being willing to take chances and make mistakes. And I think that's so important if you're an engineer, but that's also important if you're going to be a lawyer or a historian, right? There's so many areas where that's important. Just not being afraid to try something and see if it works and then build on it.
And the best way to see your program is to come on campus. And I know that my tours and Kelly's tours often as well, when we go into your space, you're so welcoming. So we invite listeners who are interested in learning more about the program or meeting Philip in person. We really encourage you to come experience it for yourself. Philip, thank you for coming on the podcast today. Your amazing work and was showcased beautifully. I'm so happy for our listeners to be able to hear this wonderful work.
Well, thanks so much. I've had a lot of fun sharing and thinking our kids really do awesome things. They've taken on big projects in there.
They really have, and you cultivate that in them. So thank you for everything that you do, not only for our students, but for our entire community. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to this episode of Raiders in Focus.
Be sure to follow Randolph School on social media and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss our next episode.
Until next time, I'm Elizabeth Crampsey,
And I'm Glenn Below, and
and
this
this
is
is
Raiders
Raiders
in
in
Focus.
Focus.